And I wanted to take up reading reading Madhya Lila, and I wanted to basically just read through some things that I've already read. And when I sat down today to start putting my thoughts together on what we would cover, I sort of realized that there's a lot of different things to pick up on to sort of make it clear. So I'm reading, I have been reading Madhya Lila, and I just finished reading chapter 2. And you know that Mahaprabhu's pastimes are the Adi Lila, the Madhya Lila, and the Antya Lila. And Adi Lila is up to his sannyas when he was 24 years old. And then Madhya Lila, it covers both his travels and his association with, and his travels to the south and his travels up to Vrindavan, plus his association with the Vaishnavas in Jagannath Puri, and then specifically the last 12 years of his life, that is covered in Antya Lila. And Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he wants to explain sort of in a synopsis form the later pastimes of Mahaprabhu. And his Kaviraj Goswami's mentality is sort of like the mentality that Srila Prabhupada had. That Srila Prabhupada, he was thinking, maybe I won't live to finish the Bhagavatam. And so because he was thinking in that way, he said, I will write a summary study of the Bhagavatam, or the 10th canto of Bhagavatam, and that will be the Krishna book, so that my people will be able to hear Krishna's Leela. And then Prabhupada, he wrote the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which is also a summary study of Caitanya-caritamrita. And he did that just in the event that he passed away. So in chapter 2, Kaviraj Goswami says, while relating in synopsis form the last division of the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, I shall describe Lord Chaitanya's transcendental ecstasy, which appeared like madness due to his separation from Krishna. And then there's all glories to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all glories to Lord Nityananda, all glories to Advaita Acharya, and all glories to all the devotees of Lord Chaitanya. And he says that during the last 12 years of his life, Mahaprabhu always manifested symptoms of separation from Krishna. Now, I don't know how to take a poll, and I don't know how, I'm not so expert at Zoom. I don't know how to see everybody's pictures at all times, but my question would be, how many people have read Caitanya-caritamrita? And how many people have read Jai Govinda has read, and Chanchalakshi has read, and Radhamadava has read, and Gopi Manohar wants to pop his hand up, but it's not going up. Anyhow, I can't see everybody that's in the chat, but he wants to explain the ecstasy, that's being felt by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the last 12 years of his life, it was all ecstasy. Those who have read, you've read how sometimes he would be feeling intense separation from Krishna. And because of that separation from Krishna, he would rub his face on the wall of his room all night long. And when the devotees would find him in the morning, his face would be covered with blood. And sometimes he was in the habit of escaping from his room, and he would run out into Puri in the evening time, and he would go searching for Krishna. So the devotees were like very careful and mindful, and they would lock the door to the Gambira so that Mahaprabhu couldn't get out, and they wouldn't hear anything going on inside of his room, and they would open the door and he would be gone. And sometimes he would fall inside of the sea. He would look at the sea and he would think the sea was the Jamuna, and he would fall into the Jamuna and he would be swept, down the coast. And sometimes he would see the sand dunes in Puri, Chataka Parvat, and he would think, oh, this is Govardhan Hill, and he would run madly towards the sand dunes. So he was constantly feeling separation from Krishna. And he was, oops, I did something here. He was teaching us that we also should learn to feel separation from Krishna. And we've read before, and we've discussed before, how Srila Sanatana Goswami describes this topic in his Brihad Bhagavatamritam. And he says that when the devotee will feel excessive separation and love from Krishna, then that devotee will feel devastated, that I cannot attain the goal of my life. I am so helpless. I am so hopeless. I am so fallen. I am so destitute. And then in that helpless and hopeless state, then in that state of Vaishnava humility, then Krishna bestows his mercy. And it's a topic that's repeated time and time again, that if we really want to, receive prema bhakti, we have to develop dainya and the feeling of separation. And Sanatana Goswami says that dainya, Vaishnava humility, and prema are one and the same. And then after that he says, but naturally we can't say that humility and prema are the same. But prema won't happen without humility. And in order to experience like this total feeling of Vaishnava humility, one must feel separation. So Mahaprabhu was always, showing his devotees, where is Krishna? Where is Krishna? Where can I find Krishna? What can I do to again be with Krishna? Where is my prananath? Where is the Lord of my life? Where is my dear friend? Where is that person that has the threefold bending form, who plays the flute by the banks of the Jamuna? Who is that person that's always stealing my mind away? And so this is his state when he lived in Jagannath Puri. And when he lived there, the final 12 years of his life, he kept very specific, very, very, very specific association. He kept the association of Sarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy. And these two personalities, they were sort of like barometers above, if that makes any sense. I think a barometer, it sort of measures air pressure. Is that correct? So they were like barometers of Bob and Prema. And these two devotees would see Lord Chaitanya, enter into some mood and relishing the taste of some mood. And then they would begin reciting verses from the Bhagavatam, or they would recite verses from Gita Govinda, or they would recite verses from Vidyapati or Chandidas that would heighten the ecstatic moods that were being shown by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They were very expert in making Lord Chaitanya cry, which is an interesting thing because they knew that he wanted to cry in separation because he wanted to feel, he's Krishna, but he wants to feel the ecstatic mood of Sri Radha. So his last years in Puri were always like this. He was always overwhelmed in transcendental ecstasy. And it was like a tsunami. It was just like torrents of ecstasy taking place day and night. And he would always be with his friends, his very, very near and dear friends. And they supported him and they encouraged him in his endeavor to feel the moods of separation of Sri Radha. So Kaviraj Goswami says that during those years, Lord Chaitanya's mood exactly corresponded to the mood of Srimati Radharani when Uddhava came from Mathura to give Krishna's message to the gopis. And you all know that story. Letters were going back and forth, and then Krishna wanted to send a letter, to give solace to the residents of Vrindavan, particularly to the gopis of Vrindavan, who were manifesting the utmost and the topmost devotion of serving him flawlessly with love and separation. And Uddhava came and he presented a letter from Krishna, and then he observed Sri Radha and her maddened state. He'd never seen anything like that before. So Lord Chaitanya's mood was just like that in his final 12 years. Lord Chaitanya constantly exhibited a state of mind exhibiting the mood of separation. All of his activities were based on forgetfulness, and his talks were always based on madness. So he was like a mad person. And even if you go to the last chapter of the Anjalila, which is the Sikshastakam prayers, Kaviraj Goswami prefaces that chapter by saying, this chapter was spoken by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in a total state of madness. And that's our Sikshastakam prayers, our the ultimate guide and the ultimate instruction in the process of devotional service. Kaviraj Goswami says sometimes in his ecstasy, blood would flow from the pores of his body. And sometimes his teeth would all become loose in his mouth. Sometimes he would become very, very slender, and sometimes he would become very, very fat. Just like that, the devotees would find they'd be with Mahaprabhu and he'd be overwhelmed in the ecstasy of separation. And all of a sudden, blood would start to pour from the pores of his body. Or, I think that time when he fell into the ocean, when the devotees found him, the joints of his body had been separated by big distances. He looked like some sort of something horrible. Sometimes his limbs would go within his body. He would look like a turtle. Sometimes he would get loose in the night. He would go and he would fall down amongst the cows and he would manifest different symptoms in his ecstatic manifestation of love for Krishna. So, okay, before we go any further, I'm skipping the point that I wanted to make. The point that I wanted to make is Kaviraj Goswami, he says right in the beginning that I'm giving a synopsis of this now, because I'm not sure if I will live to write the whole thing. And we're fortunate that he lived to write the whole thing. Now, the way Kaviraj Goswami got his information was this. Swarup Damodar Goswami used to keep diaries of as much as he could write down of everything that Lord Chaitanya did. And recently I was listening to Shivaram Maharaj when he was giving his seminar on Lord Chaitanya's travels. And he was mentioning this point about Kaviraj Goswami always, saying that I've written so much, to try to write more will increase the volume of the book. But you can only imagine that with Lord Chaitanya being present at every second or at every moment, some phenomenal pastime was taking place. There was never a dull moment with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It was always spiritual ecstasy with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Swarup Damodar, he tried to write down in a diary as much as he could. And then when Raghunath Das Goswami went to Jagannath Puri, Lord Chaitanya basically received him. And then what did Lord Chaitanya do? Lord Chaitanya, he took Raghunath Das Goswami and he said, Swarup, I give him to you. You teach him about Krishna consciousness. You teach him everything. So one of the names of Swarup Damodar, one of the names of Raghunath is Raghu Swarup, meaning he's the Raghunath of Swarup Damodar. So he told Raghunath Das Goswami, everything I've written, you memorize. And so Raghunath Das Goswami, he memorized. And then after Mahaprabhu left and after all the associates left, and Raghunath Das couldn't stay in Puri any longer because it was just everything he saw in Puri, caused him to almost die in separation. He decided that the most auspicious thing for him to do would be to go to Vrindavan Dham and take shelter of the feet of Rupa and Sanatana Goswami and then kill himself. And he came to Vrindavan, and then something else happened. They told him he couldn't kill himself, and they told him to take shelter of Radha Kund. So he went to Radha Kund, and then later he met Kaviraj Goswami, and he narrated what he had read in Swarup Damodar's diaries and what he had personally seen of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Kaviraj Goswami. Now, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, there's not a lot that's known about his life before, but it is known that he was born in a place called Jamatpur. And Jamatpur is near Burdwan in West Bengal. And I know Burdwan because I used to take the Kalka mail from Delhi to Calcutta. And the train would always stop in Burdwan at 6 o'clock in the morning. And you'd always hear the guys on the platform, they'd be going, Garam Singara. And we would always buy the samosas on the platform, and somehow we would live. So Burdwan, Jamatpur, Burdwan. And the only thing that's details that he's known is known as he was born I wrote it down. He was born in 1496 and he left in 1588. So it means that he was 92 years old when he left. And approximately, he met Raghunath Das Goswami. Raghunath Das Goswami came to Vrindavan when Kaviraj Goswami was already into his 60s. So Kaviraj Goswami, he often says, I'm really old. You know, I'm really old. I'm afflicted by many diseases simultaneously. Practically, I can't see any longer. I don't know if I'm going to live. You know, that was his mentality. He said, I don't know how I'm going to do this. But he lived, and Caitanya-caritamrita was sort of like his magnum opus, his greatest literary contribution to the Gaudiya Vaishnava world, or to humanity, and describing the pastimes and the theology and philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now Kaviraj Goswami tells the story about how he came to Vrindavan. And perhaps you have heard that or you have read it, but it's described that one evening at his home in Jamatpur, or one day in his place in Jamatpur, he decided to organize a 24-hour kirtan. So we can see that 24-hour kirtans are not a new thing. It's not that ISKCON started it. They've been going on for a long time. And living in his city was one of the intimate personal associates of Sri Nityananda Prabhu. And his name was Minikitan Ramdas. And Minikitan Ramdas was one of the 12 Gopal associates of Balaram. So Minikitan was not a small person. He was like Lord Balaram's personal associate, and he was a personal associate of Lord Nityananda. And he had because he was a cowherd boy, and he was a happy cowherd boy, he had a very interesting nature that he always had a flute that he would play like a cowherd boy. And sometimes when he would go to a gathering and there'd be people there and people would come and they would be bowing down and offering respect, Minikitan Ramdas would just come up with his flute and give them a good whack on their head. And sometimes he'd just come up and give people a good slap, you know? And he had an eccentric cowherd boy, rambunctious nature. And for this 24-hour kirtan, they hired a pujari, and his name was Gunarnava Mishra. And Gunarnava Mishra was observing this activity of Minikitan Ramdas. And he went and he had a discussion, you know, with Minikitan. He's saying, why are you doing this, you know? Why are you behaving in this way? And Minikitan, when he heard that, he said, oh, here is a person who doesn't have full faith in Lord Nityananda. And so, no, that is not exactly the way it happened. When Minikitan was there and he was doing all these things, people were coming and offering their obeisances, but Gunarnava Mishra didn't offer his obeisances because he considered that he's some sort of eccentric fellow. And then when Minikitan saw that, immediately he just pointed his finger and he said, here we have the second Ramaharshan Sutta. Said, you know, he doesn't respect Lord Balaram. I'm the associate of Lord Nityananda Balaram. He's not showing respect, and respect is due to Balaram. And he chastised him. And Gunarnava Mishra, when he got chastised, he felt so happy. He said, I've been chastised by a Vaishnav. I've been chastised by the associate of Lord Nityananda. And it's such a nice thing to be chastised. Generally, we always look for the sugar or the sweet, and we're not looking for the chili. But sometimes the chili comes and we don't like that. But whether it's the chili or the sweet, it's all prasad. And he was very, very happy that he got chastised. And then he finished his seva as the pujari. And then he went home and he was happy. But then at the conclusion of the Mela, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's younger brother, his name was Shamananda, he came to Minikittan Ramdas. And his nature, this Shamananda, is he had full faith on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but he didn't have so much faith on Nityananda Prabhu. And he started, having discussion with Minikittan Ramdas, about his behavior with Gunarnava Mishra and the way that he behaved with the other Vaishnavas. And when Minikittan Ramdas heard that, he became really upset, really, really upset. And that flute that he always had, he just became angry. And he broke his flute in half and he threw it on the ground. And at that time, something interesting happened. That Kaviraj Goswami was looking at Minikittan and his younger brother. And many times you find, like in families, if some sort of feud starts with somebody else, families always stick up for the family members. They say that blood is thicker than water. People want to defend, the family member. Or, if I chastise Jai Govinda, Radhamadava will cut my head. Or if I chastise Radhamadava, Jai Govinda will cut my head. But Kaviraj Goswami, he saw this and he stepped up. And what happened is this. Kaviraj Goswami says, my brother had firm faith in Lord Chaitanya, but only a dim glimmer of faith in Lord Nityananda. Knowing this, Ramdas became so sad in his heart. How is he not honoring Lord Nityananda? And then Kaviraj Goswami says, at that moment, I stood up and I began to chastise my brother, and I began to rebuke my brother. And he says, this is what I told my brother. These two brothers are like one body. They are identical manifestations. If you do not believe in Lord Nityananda, you will fall down. If you have faith in one, but you disrespect the other, your logic is like the logic of accepting half of a hen. You know that logic? Like you like the side of the hen that the egg falls out of, but you don't like the side of the hen that you got to feed. So you accept one half, but you don't accept the other half. So he said, if you have firm faith in one but don't respect the other, it's like this broken logic of accepting half of a hen. And then he looked at it and he said, it would be better to be an atheist by disrespecting both brothers than a hypocrite in believing in one but not believing in the other. So he really showed how firm his faith was in Gaur-Nitai. So it's at that point, when Ramdas heard that, Ramdas went kalas. He said, it's finished. He said, Kaviraj Goswami, he just did the job. And that's when Ramdas just broke his flute in anger and he went away. And then Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says, And at that very moment, my brother fell down because he offended a Vaishnava. He offended the personal associate of Nityananda Prabhu, and he just fell down. And this is why we should be very, very careful at all times about Vaishnava aparad. Not offending Vaishnavas, not thinking badly about Vaishnavas, not having bad ideas, looking at Vaishnavas badly, but always keep a clear and an open mind. So Kaviraj Goswami says, I have thus described the power of the servants of Lord Nityananda, but now I will describe to you another amazing characteristic of Lord Nityananda's mercy. So this is he's going to say something, he's going to tell us something very intimate now, which is very nice and it's very wonderful. He says, that very night, Lord Nityananda came to me in a dream because of my good fortune that I chastised my brother. He said, Nitai was so pleased with me, that he came to me in a dream. He said, in Jamatpur, in a village, Jamatpur, near Naihati, that very night, Nityananda came to me in a dream. When I saw him, I fell at his feet and I offered obeisances, and then he placed his 2 lotus feet upon my head. Nityananda spoke to me and he said, arise, get up, arise, get up, arise, get up. And finally, when I got up, I was so utterly amazed to see the beauty that Nityananda was showing me. And this is how he describes Nitai. And it's an interesting description. He said he had a very shiny, glossy, but blackish complexion. He was very tall. He was very strong and heroic in nature. And although he was looking very heroic and very chivalrous, he looked exactly like Cupid himself. He wore beautiful golden earrings on his ears. He wore golden armlets and golden bracelets. He wore tinkling anklets on his feet, and he had a beautiful white garland around his neck. His body was totally anointed with sandalwood pulp, and he was nicely decorated with tilak. And his movements were surpassing the movement of a mad elephant. I mean, we've all seen elephants before. You know, sometimes you're in Mayapur and you're walking down the road behind the elephants and you see how the elephants are moving so majestically, you know, how they must move when they become like maddened. He said Nitai was just moving like this regal, majestic, maddened elephant. His face was more beautiful than millions and millions and millions of full moons. And his teeth were like pomegranate seeds because of chewing pan. It's interesting that Nitai was having some pan and his teeth were all pinkish and looking very beautiful. His body was moving to and fro. He was absorbed in ecstasy, and with a deep voice, he was chanting, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. His devotees, dressed like cowherd boys, surrounded his feet like so many bumblebees, and they were all also chanting Krishna, Krishna, and ecstatic love. It's a very beautiful scene you've got going on here. And, I've always been curious over the years, like generally we think of Balaram or Nitai to be white. And here it says he was showing this glossy, blackish form. And different saints I've spoken to, they've told me that it's because he was absorbed in the mood of Krishna. And it was like this tadatma bhav, which is the example that Srila Prabhupada would always give of taking the iron rod and putting inside of the fire, and then the iron rod becomes red like the fire. And so his consciousness was absorbed in Krishna, so he was showing glossy blackish form like Krishna. Like here in Imlital, Krishna used to sit there and he used to chant Radha, and Krishna would turn gold. And when Lord Chaitanya came to Imlital, he would chant Krishna, and Lord Chaitanya became black. So he was chanting and he was dancing, and all of his boyfriends, they were dancing around him like bumblebees. Some of his boyfriends, they were playing horns, and some of them were playing flutes, and others just danced, and others just sang. Some of them were offering him betel, and some waved chamara fans above him. Thus, I saw the opulence, such opulence in Sri Nityananda Swarup. His wonderful form, qualities, and pastimes were all transcendently manifest. I was overwhelmed with ecstasy, and I didn't know anything else. I did not know what to do. Then, all of a sudden, Nityananda smiled very broadly, and he spoke to me. And he said, "Oh, my dear Krishnadas, go to Vrindavan. Do not be afraid." He said, "For there you will attain all desirable things." And after saying this, Nitai just pointed his hand in the direction of Vrindavan, and he said, "Go to Vrindavan. There you will attain all desirable things." And then in that moment, Nitai and all of his associates, they disappeared. That's quite a dream, isn't it? Quite a wonderful dream. If we could do something to have Nitai appear before us and give us mercy and tell us to go to Vrindavan. I guess, all of us, we have our own particular stories about how we got to Vrindavan. This is Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's story about how he got to Vrindavan. Nityananda Balaram told me to go there, and he said, if you go there, all desirable things will become fulfilled for you. At that moment, Kaviraj Goswami says, I fainted, and I fell on the ground, and that dream that I had, it broke. And when I regained consciousness, I saw that morning had come. And he said, I started thinking what to do. I started thinking this, he gave me this instruction in the dream. He told me to go. And then he just concluded, I will leave for Vrindavan immediately. Like his mother and father were gone. He only had his brother, Shamananda, who had fallen down the night before. And then he said, I leave for Vrindavan. And then he just left. And he went to Vrindavan. He said, in that very second, I left and I went to Vrindavan. And by Nityananda's mercy, I reached there in great happiness. And he says, all glories to Lord Nityananda Balaram, by whose mercy I obtained the transcendental shelter of the realm of Sri Vrindavan Dham. All glories to that merciful Lord Nityananda, by whose mercy I have attained the shelter of the feet of Rupa and Sanatana Goswami. And then he continues to glorify Nitai. He's saying, by Nitai's mercy, I came to Vrindavan. By Nitai's mercy, I got the association of Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami. By Nitai's mercy, I got the mercy of Raghunath Das Goswami. And then he says, and by Nitai's mercy, I received the blessings of the deity Madan Gopal. And when he came, devotees who lived in Vrindavan, they understood that he was a writer. He was Kaviraj. He had this title, Kaviraj. And so naturally, what were all the Gaudiya Vaishnavas doing? The Gaudiya Vaishnavas were saying, write about Lord Chaitanya. Write about Lord Chaitanya. Write about the activities of Mahaprabhu. We want to hear about Lord Chaitanya. And so ultimately, he went to, I think it was the Madan Mohan deity. And he was praying to Madan Mohanji. And while he was praying, Madan Mohan's garland fell off and landed on him. And then he took that as a confirmation. Yes, I should write the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now he's pretty great, Vaishnav. He's an eternal associate. And in Krishna's Leela, he is one of Srimati Radharani's Manjari maidservants. I think he's Kasturi Manjari, although I could be corrected on that. But he's an intimate associate, intimate servant of Srimati Radharani, and he was an intimate associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But listen to how he describes himself. He's undoubtedly the greatest, but he's considering himself in this way. I am more sinful than Jagai and Madai, and even lower than the worms in stool. Anyone who hears my name loses the results of his pious activities, and anyone who will utter my name will become sinful. Who in this world but Nityananda could show his mercy to such an abominable person as me? Because he is intoxicated by ecstatic love and is an incarnation of mercy, he does not distinguish between the good and the bad. He delivers everybody who will bow down before him, and he has delivered such a fallen person as myself. Although I am so sinful and I am most fallen, he has given me to the feet of Rupa and Sanatana Goswami. Okay. So we touched on Kaviraj Goswami and started writing Caitanya-caritamrita when he was 61. And now and that's why he's worried. Let me write a synopsis because I may die. And now it is 1917 over here. I have 13 minutes to get to Krishna Balaram Mandir to start leading kirtan. You're off all this week? Jai Govinda?
Yeah. Yes, Guru Maharaj.
Guru Maharaj.
Okay, we'll meet again. I had a plan maybe to go to Delhi tomorrow, although I don't know. But we'll meet a couple more times this week. Is that okay with you all?
Yes, Guru Maharaj.
Yes, Guru Maharaj.
Guru Maharaj.
Okay. Thank you all very much. All glories to Lord Nityananda Prabhu, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami ki jai, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai, Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. And if you want to hear the kirtan, I think the best thing to do would be to go to vrindavantv.com, and we'll be doing it over there in a few minutes. Great to see you all. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Guru Maharaj.
Once again, thank you all for all of the help that you've been giving, and thank you all for being so steadfast in your practice as a devotional service. It really means a lot to me. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, I
Krishna.
gotta go. I gotta run. Hare Krishna.
Hare